Rejected by the Viscount for being too old, Lady Francesca Hartley had perfected the art of stillness. At 22, she stood on Lady Pemberton's terrace watching the glittering ballroom through French doors, her pearl-white gloves unmarred by even a tremor. Tonight should have been ordinary. Another ball, another waltz with her fiancé, another step toward the security of becoming Viscountess Ashford. But for the past 6 weeks, whispers had circulated. Viscount Henry Ashford, seen at Vauxhall Gardens with Lady Sarah Winters. Henry, leaving the theater with Miss Charlotte Beaumont. Henry, always Henry, with someone younger, fresher, more acceptable. She had been a fool. Not for missing the signs, she'd seen everyone, but for ignoring them, for choosing safety over substance, for believing that a perfect match on paper could compensate for the emptiness she felt every time he kissed her hand. Francesca. His voice came from behind her, smooth as silk and just as cold. We need to talk. Oh. Astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. Francesca didn't turn immediately. She took one more breath of the night air, cataloging this moment. The scent of orange blossoms from the potted trees, the distant strains of a Viennese waltz, the way the moonlight caught the Thames in the distance. Something in her already knew. This was the end of one life and the beginning of something else entirely. When she finally faced him, Henry was adjusting his cuff links. Even now, even for this, he was worried about his appearance. Of course, she said, her voice carrying that particular modulation her governess had drilled into her. Pleasant, unremarkable, utterly controlled. Though I wonder at the location. Surely such conversations are better suited to private drawing rooms. Henry's jaw tightened, the only tell that her composure irritated him. He'd wanted tears, she realized. He'd wanted the scene. I thought it kinder this way, away from prying eyes. He gestured vaguely toward the ballroom where 300 members of the ton were currently pretending not to watch them through the windows. Francesca, you're a wonderful woman. Truly. But let's be frank. We both know this match was always more practical than passionate. How diplomatic, Francesca murmured. You're 22. He said it like an accusation, like a diagnosis. You've had 2 full seasons. You're accomplished, well-bred, perfectly adequate in every respect. But I need more than adequate. I need someone who brings freshness to the title. Someone who hasn't already been examined and catalogued by every matchmaking mama in London. Adequate. The word hung between them like a slap she was supposed to pretend hadn't landed. I see, Francesca said softly. And does Lady Sarah Winters know you've already selected her as my replacement? Or is Miss Beaumont still in contention? I confess I've lost track of your auditions. For the first time in their entire 6-month engagement, she watched genuine surprise cross Henry's face. His mouth opened, closed, the perfect parliamentary composure finally cracking. That's not. You have no right to. To what? To notice that my fiancé has been courting half the debutantes in London while still wearing my ring. Francesca tilted her head, studying him with the detached curiosity usually reserved for insects under glass. Tell me, Henry, did you practice this speech? It has the rhythm of something rehearsed. You're being hysterical. I'm being observant. There's a difference. She took a single step closer, close enough to see the sheen of perspiration on his upper lip despite the cool evening air. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to announce that our engagement has ended by mutual agreement. You're going to be gracious about it. You're going to tell everyone that we realized we wouldn't suit, and you're going to wish me well. And why, Henry said, recovering some of his swagger, would I agree to that? I'm the one ending this, Francesca. You don't get to dictate terms. Don't I? She smiled then, and it wasn't the practiced drawing room smile she'd perfected over 2 seasons. It was something sharper, something real. Before you answer, consider this. I know about the IOUs, the ones you've been hiding from your father. £12,000 to Lord Ashworth, another 8 to Viscount Weatherby. Shall I continue? The color drained from Henry's face. I know about the actress in Covent Garden. Miss Lily Preston, isn't it? Pretty girl. Expensive tastes. I know you've been paying her rent for 7 months. Francesca's voice never rose above that perfectly modulated whisper, but each word landed like a stone in still water. I also know about the rather creative way you've been managing your estate accounts, borrowing from next quarter's rents to pay this quarter's debts. Your steward must be extraordinarily loyal to cover for you this long. How did I know? Francesca laughed, a soft sound that held no humor. Henry, you chose me because I was adequate, sensible, well-bred, the kind of woman who wouldn't cause scandal or make demands. But did you never wonder what else those qualities implied? Intelligent women don't stop being intelligent simply because you find them convenient. She watched him process this, watched the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to determine if she was bluffing. She wasn't. My aunt, Francesca continued calmly, is best friends with Lady Ashworth. My cousin is engaged to Lord Weatherby's son. As for Miss Preston, well, actresses do love to gossip, particularly when they're drinking champagne with other actresses whose protectors' wives are friends of mine. She paused, letting that sink in. I haven't been pining, Henry. I've been paying attention. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant music and the rustle of her silk gown in the evening breeze. You wouldn't, Henry finally said, but there was no conviction in it. I would prefer not to, Francesca corrected. Scandal serves no one. But if you force my hand, if you try to paint me as the rejected, desperate spinster, I will ensure that every door in London closes to you. Your father may be a duke, but even he can't protect you from this much stupidity. Henry's hands clenched at his sides. She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to reassert control. But they both knew she'd won. Fine, he bit out. Mutual agreement. Amicable separation. How generous of you. Francesca pulled off her engagement ring, a modest sapphire that had never quite fit properly, and held it out. I believe this belongs to your family. He snatched it from her palm like she might change her mind. Was there ever, she asked quietly, any part of this that was real? Even in the beginning, Henry had the grace to look away. You were the logical choice. My father approved. Your breeding was impeccable. I thought logic was enough. Logic without affection is just arithmetic, Francesca said. You'll learn that eventually, probably when Lady Sarah realizes you're bankrupt. She turned then, gathering her skirts with hands that still didn't shake, and walked toward the terrace steps, away from the ballroom, away from the life she'd almost settled for. Where are you going? Henry called after her, sounding genuinely confused that she wasn't returning to face the gossips. Anywhere but here. The gravel crunched beneath her silk slippers as she descended into the garden. The ballroom's lights faded behind her, the music becoming a distant echo. Somewhere in the rational part of her mind, Francesca knew she should be devastated. Her engagement was over. Her reputation would be questioned. 2 seasons, 2 years of careful social navigation, all unraveling in a single evening. But all she felt was lightness, like she'd been carrying something heavy for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The garden path led to the front drive where carriages waited in an orderly line, their lamps glowing like fireflies in the darkness. Francesca walked past them all, headed for where? Home? Her parents' townhouse where her mother would fret and her father would rage about the insult to their family name? No, not yet. She couldn't face that yet. A carriage stood apart from the others, distinctive even in the darkness. Black lacquer polished to a mirror shine, the door emblazoned with a ducal crest she recognized instantly. The Duke of Ashford's personal carriage. Henry's father. Had he come to collect his son? Was he inside, waiting to hear about the broken engagement? The mortification was immediate and acute. She couldn't face him. Not the Duke. Not the man who had always been kind to her in that distant, paternal way that made her wish Henry had inherited even a fraction of his father's character. She turned to slip past the carriage, to disappear into the London streets if necessary. Lady Francesca. The voice came from inside the carriage, deep and measured and utterly unmistakable. The door swung open, revealing Duke Richard Ashford himself, silver-haired and elegant even in the shadows. "Your Grace, Her composure finally cracked. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. I should go." "Get in the carriage, Francesca." It wasn't a command. It wasn't quite a request. It was something else entirely, an offer of sanctuary delivered with absolute certainty. She should refuse. It was inappropriate. It would cause talk. It would... Her feet were moving before her mind finished its protests. The footman helped her up, and she found herself sitting across from Duke Richard in a carriage that smelled of leather and expensive cologne and safety. The door closed. The carriage rolled forward, and Lady Francesca Hartley left the ruins of her old life behind without looking back. The silence stretched for 3 blocks before Francesca found her voice. "You were waiting for me." Not a question. The carriage had been positioned too perfectly, his timing too precise. "Yes." Duke Richard didn't elaborate, simply watched her with those steady gray eyes that had always unnerved her because they saw too much. "You knew. About Henry." Her hands twisted in her lap, the only outward sign of her agitation. "I've known about Henry's character defects for considerably longer than you have, I'm afraid. Being his father has afforded me a rather comprehensive education in disappointment." His voice carried dry humor rather than bitterness. "I knew about tonight specifically because he asked my permission to break the engagement 3 days ago. I told him he was a fool." Francesca absorbed this, the betrayal somehow sharper knowing it had been planned, discussed, approved by family. "And yet you gave your permission." "I gave him enough rope to hang himself with. There's a difference." Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. "Francesca, may I be frank? I'm too old for the sort of delicate dancing around subjects that polite society demands." "You're 47, she said automatically. "That's hardly ancient." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Pleasure? She couldn't quite name it. "You know my age. I pay attention to things." Heat crept up her neck. "I'm sorry, that was impertinent. It was observant. There's a difference." He echoed her own words from the terrace, and despite everything, Francesca felt her lips twitch with the ghost of a smile. "Here is what I propose to tell you, and I ask that you let me finish before you respond. Can you do that?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've watched you for 3 years. Not as my sons intended, that unfortunate development only occurred 6 months ago, but as the most remarkable woman in London. I've watched you navigate ballrooms with intelligence and grace. I've listened to you discuss literature and politics with actual comprehension rather than pretty parroting. I've seen you be kind to wallflowers and cutting to bullies, always in exact proportion to what's deserved." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've watched you settle for my son, and it has been one of the more painful observations of my life." Francesca's breath caught. "Your Grace." "I'm not finished." But his tone was gentle. "I'm a widower. Have been for 12 years. My marriage was arranged, loveless, and mercifully brief. I swore I wouldn't marry again unless it could be to someone I actually respected. Someone who challenged me intellectually. Someone who made me want to be better than I am." The carriage swayed around a corner, the lamplight catching the silver in his hair. I'm offering you a choice, Francesca. Not rescue, you don't need rescuing. But partnership. Come to my estate tonight. Marry me tomorrow. Return to London as a duchess rather than a discarded fiancée. The world tilted. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And before you cite our age difference, consider this. Henry is 25. I'm 47. That's a 22-year gap. You're 22. The mathematics are poetic, don't you think? His smile was self-deprecating. I can offer you respect, intellectual companionship, protection, and complete freedom to pursue whatever interests you wish. I cannot offer you youthful passion or the pretense that this is a love match. But I can promise you'll never be called adequate again. Francesca stared at him, her mind racing through implications and impossibilities. Society would talk. They'd call her calculating, mercenary, scandalous. But they'd also have to call her duchess. And this man, this unexpected silver-haired man, was offering her everything Henry hadn't. Respect, partnership, choice. Where is your estate? She heard herself ask. Ashford Manor, 3 hours north. We'd arrive by dawn. And the marriage? My private chapel. My vicar. Entirely legal. Entirely binding. He watched her carefully. This isn't a rescue, Francesca. It's an offer. You can say no. I'll take you home, and we'll never speak of this again. But she was already reaching for the answer she'd known since she climbed into his carriage. Since she'd walked away from Henry. Since she'd realized that settling was its own kind of death. Yes, Francesca said. Take me to Ashford Manor. Dawn broke over Ashford Manor like a benediction. Rose gold light spilling across limestone and manicured gardens that spoke of centuries rather than seasons. Francesca descended from the carriage on unsteady legs, her ball gown absurdly out of place in the morning mist, and felt something in her chest unclench. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's home, Richard said simply, offering his arm. Come. My staff has been alerted. Breakfast, a bath, rest. We'll marry this afternoon if you're still willing. The words still hung in the air like a question. He was giving her every opportunity to retreat, she realized. Every chance to change her mind. She took his arm. The next hours blurred into surreal domesticity. Richard's housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, clucked over her like a long-lost daughter, drawing a bath scented with lavender and laying out a simple morning dress in soft blue. No judgment, no questions, just capable efficiency and surprising warmth. His Grace has been alone too long, Mrs. Davies said, fastening the buttons at Francesca's back. Needs someone with sense. You'll do nicely, I think. You don't even know me. I know you didn't faint or cry or demand to be taken home. The housekeeper's eyes crinkled. I know you're here. That's enough. Francesca found Richard in his library. A soaring room of oak and leather and more books than she'd seen outside of universities. He'd changed into simpler clothes, his cravat loosened, and was reading by the window with reading glasses perched on his nose. The intimacy of it, seeing him unguarded, domestic, made her chest tight. I thought you might flee while I was occupied, she said from the doorway. He looked up, and something in his expression softened. I thought the same of you. Clearly we're both committed to this madness. Madness or brilliance. History will decide. Come here. He set the book aside, and when she crossed to him, he caught her hand. Not pulling, just holding. Are you certain? Truly? Because once we do this, there's no undo. I won't divorce you, Francesca. I don't believe in it. So if you have any doubts. I have dozens of doubts, she admitted. But none of them are about you. The wedding was precisely as promised. Small, private, utterly binding. The chapel was Norman stone and stained glass. The vicar elderly and kind. The witnesses' loyal staff who'd served the duchy for decades. Francesca wore the blue morning dress and carried wildflowers from the garden. Richard wore gray and looked at her like she was something precious. I, Richard Edward Ashford, take thee, Francesca Margaret Hartley. The words washed over her, ancient and unbreakable. When he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, an emerald that actually fit, she felt the weight of it like a promise. You may kiss your bride. Richard cupped her face with surprising gentleness and kissed her softly, chastely, with a reverence that made her eyes sting. Not passion, not yet, but something that felt remarkably like hope. Your Grace, he murmured against her lips. Duchess. That night, their wedding night. He found her on the terrace outside her chambers, wrapped in a borrowed dressing gown and staring at stars she'd never seen in London's smoke. Regretting it already? He asked, joining her at the rail. Wondering if I'm dreaming. If you are, I'm having the same dream, which seems statistically unlikely. He handed her a glass of wine. I meant what I said earlier. This is a partnership. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Francesca turned to study him. This man who was now her husband, who she barely knew and yet trusted inexplicably. Why did you really do this? The truth. Richard was quiet for a long moment, considering. Because I'm lonely. Because you're extraordinary. Because my son is a fool, and I'm old enough not to waste opportunities when they present themselves. He met her gaze steadily. Because 3 years ago, I watched you put Lady Morrison in her place for mocking a stammering debutante, and I thought, there's someone worth knowing, and I've been wanting to know you ever since. That's terrifyingly honest. I told you I'm too old for games. He smiled. Your turn. Truth. I married you because you offered me respect. Because I'm tired of being underestimated. Because... She hesitated, then plunged forward. Because in one carriage ride, you made me feel more seen than Henry did in 6 months. Then we're both getting what we wanted. When he kissed her goodnight, deeper this time, with promise rather than performance. Francesca kissed him back and felt the first genuine spark of desire she'd experienced in years. Not because he was young or handsome or what society expected, but because he was real. 3 days they spent at Ashford Manor, learning each other in daylight and darkness. Learning that Richard laughed at her dry wit. That he valued her opinions on estate management. That his touch could be gentle and demanding in equal measure. That partnership, it turned out, was its own kind of aphrodisiac. On the morning of the 4th day, over breakfast in the conservatory, he said, Lady Northbridge is hosting a ball Friday night. Yes, everyone will be there. Including Henry. Including Henry, she confirmed. Richard buttered his toast with deliberate care. Shall we attend, Your Grace? Make our first official appearance as husband and wife. Francesca smiled, sharp and satisfied. I thought you'd never ask. The announcement arrived before they did, precisely as planned. By Thursday evening, every household in Mayfair knew. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford request the pleasure of your company at Lady Northbridge's ball. Francesca could imagine the explosion. The gasping matrons. The calculating mamas. Henry's face when someone told him. They'll tear us apart, she said. Watching her ladies made arrange her hair into something approaching art. They'll try, Richard agreed from the doorway, devastatingly handsome in black evening wear. And they'll fail. Do you know why? Because you're a duke? Because we're happy. And nothing enrages society quite like people who refuse to be ashamed. He crossed to her, lifting the Ashford emeralds from their case. A necklace that had adorned duchesses for 200 years. May I? The stones were cool against her skin, the weight of them a statement. She met his eyes in the mirror. I'm nervous. Good. So am I. We'll be nervous together. His hands settled on her shoulders. Remember, we're not going to defend ourselves. We're simply going to exist, obviously content, and let them draw their own conclusions. The carriage ride into London was quiet, their hands linked between them. When they turned onto Grosvenor Square, Francesca felt her pulse quicken. "Last chance to flee to Scotland," Richard murmured. "And miss this? Never." The Northbridge mansion blazed with light, music spilling into the street along with the chatter of hundreds of guests. Their carriage joined the queue, inching forward until a footman opened their door. Richard descended first, then turned to hand her down. The moment her foot touched the pavement, conversation stuttered and stopped. Faces turned, stared. "Steady," Richard whispered, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. They climbed the steps together, and Francesca kept her chin high, her expression serene. Inside, the butler's voice rang out with magnificent indifference. "The Duke and Duchess of Ashford." The ballroom fell silent. Utterly, completely silent. 300 members of the ton turned as one to gape at the impossible. Lady Francesca Hartley, who'd been publicly jilted 1 week ago, now wearing the Ashford emeralds and the title that should have been a generation away. And there by the refreshment table, wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, stood Viscount Henry Ashford, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. Richard's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Shall we dance, darling?" "Darling." The endearment was deliberate, pitched to carry. Francesca felt her lips curve into a genuine smile. "I'd be delighted." They swept onto the dance floor, and after one endless moment, the orchestra stumbled back into the waltz. Conversations resumed, urgent, scandalized, fascinated. But Francesca barely heard them. She was too focused on the man holding her, on the sure pressure of his hand at her waist. The way he looked at her like nothing else in the room mattered. "You're magnificent," he said quietly. "We're magnificent," she corrected. They danced past Henry, close enough that Francesca could see the shock etched into his features, the desperate calculation behind his eyes. She felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication. Just vast, surprising indifference. "Your Grace," Lady Catherine Ashford, Richard's sister, materialized beside them as the waltz ended, her expression fierce with approval. "You absolute genius. Both of you. I could kiss you." "Please don't," Richard said dryly. "We're causing enough scandal as it is." "Scandal? This is glorious." Catherine squeezed Francesca's hand. "I never liked that boy anyway. His father's always been the better man." Over the next hour, society recalibrated. The first brave soul to approach was the Countess of Pemberton, whose ball had hosted the original disaster. "Your Grace," she said carefully. "What a surprise. May I offer my congratulations?" "You may," Francesca said graciously. "Though I rather think the surprise is mutual." Others followed, some genuine, some calculating, all unwilling to cut a duchess. Especially not the Duke of Ashford's duchess. Power, Francesca learned, was the greatest social lubricant. It was nearly midnight when Henry finally worked up the courage to approach. Richard saw him coming and tightened his grip on Francesca's waist almost imperceptibly. "Father." "Francesca." Henry's voice was strangled. "Might I have a word?" "You've had 6 months of words, Henry," Richard said pleasantly. "I believe you've exhausted your allotment. But this is... You can't just... She was mine." The possessive made Francesca's temper spike. "I was never yours. I was briefly convinced to settle for you. There's a difference. You married him out of spite." "I married him out of intelligence," Francesca corrected, "which is something you've always struggled to recognize in others." Richard's hand moved to the small of her back, protective and proud. "My son, let me offer you some free advice. When you discard something valuable, don't be surprised when someone with better judgment claims it. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're starting another waltz." He swept her back onto the floor, leaving Henry gaping in their wake. Around them, fans fluttered, whispers escalated. But Francesca barely noticed. She was too busy falling a little bit more in love with her brilliant, unexpected husband. That was devastating, she said admiringly. That was necessary. Richard's expression softened. Are you all right? I'm perfect. And shockingly, impossibly, she meant it. News of Henry's troubles began trickling in like poison through cracks in marble. First came the whispers, then the public denials, then the inevitable exposure that made denial impossible. It started with Lord Ashworth calling in the IOUs publicly at White's, his voice carrying across the gaming room. £12,000, Ashford. I've been patient long enough. Henry had paled, stammered, promised payment within the month. He didn't have it. Everyone knew he didn't have it. I heard, Lady Catherine reported gleefully over tea at Ashford House, that 3 other creditors followed suit within hours, like vultures circling. Francesca set down her cup carefully. How much does he owe in total? North of £30,000. Catherine's eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction. Your husband didn't happen to have anything to do with the timing, did he? Richard, reading the Times by the window, didn't look up. I may have mentioned to several interested parties that Henry's financial situation warranted their immediate attention. Purely out of concern, you understand. Of course, Francesca murmured, hiding her smile behind her teacup. Purely concern. The next blow came from an unexpected quarter. Lady Sarah Winter's father, the wealthy industrialist everyone had assumed would be grateful for his daughter's advancement, withdrew his conditional approval of Henry's suit. Publicly, in a letter to the Times. Upon further investigation into Viscount Ashford's character and finances, I find him unsuitable as a potential son-in-law. My daughter deserves better than a man who discards fiancés like unfashionable cravats. The Ton devoured it. At Lady Morrison's musicale, Francesca overheard 2 dowagers dissecting Henry's prospects with surgical precision. No respectable family will touch him now. Not with debt and disgrace hanging over him like that. And to have been so publicly rejected by his own father. Imagine. The Duke choosing the former fiancé over his own son. Francesca excused herself before they noticed her, finding Richard in the card room. He took one look at her face and made their excuses, guiding her to their carriage. Regretting the casualties? He asked gently once they were alone. No, she said slowly. Is that terrible? I thought I'd feel guilty, but I just don't. He earned every consequence. Richard pulled her against his side. You didn't ruin him, Francesca. You simply stopped protecting him from himself. The truly delicious blow came from Miss Lily Preston, the Covent Garden actress. Someone, Francesca suspected Catherine, had sent her a generous anonymous gift. In gratitude, Miss Preston had given a detailed interview to one of London's more salacious gossip rags. The Viscount promised me respectability, she'd said, while treating me like a shameful secret. He wanted youth and beauty on his arm, but had neither the character nor the funds to maintain me properly. When the money stopped, so did my discretion. Henry's mother, the Dowager Viscountess, had always been kind to Francesca. 3 weeks after the wedding, she called at Ashford House, her expression weary but resolute. I'm not here to defend my son, she said, settling into the drawing-room chair Francesca offered. I'm here to apologize. I knew Henry's character wasn't solid. I hoped marriage to someone like you might improve him. People don't improve just because we hope for it, Francesca said gently. No, they don't. The dowager's gaze moved to Richard, who joined them silently. You could have chosen anyone, Richard. That you chose her says everything about your judgment. I've always had excellent judgment, Richard replied. Just took me 47 years to act on it properly. The dowager managed a thin smile. She'll make a far better duchess than viscountess anyway. Silver linings. By the end of the month, Henry was a social pariah. His club membership quietly lapsed. Invitations dried up. Even his closest friends maintained careful distance. Francesca watched his unraveling with detached curiosity, like observing a scientific experiment reach its logical conclusion. "Do you think he'll recover?" she asked Richard one night, curled in his study while he worked through estate correspondence. "Eventually, if he learns humility and restraint." Richard signed a letter with a flourish. "More likely he'll limp along on his title and diminished allowance, blaming everyone but himself. That seems exhausting. Being Henry has always been exhausting. That's why I'm much happier being married to you instead." He set aside his work, pulling her into his lap with easy affection. "Speaking of which, how are you feeling? You were looking green at breakfast." Francesca had been dreading this conversation and anticipating it in equal measure. "I'm pregnant." Richard went very still. "Are you certain?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday." She watched his face carefully, searching for disappointment or obligation. "I know this wasn't part of the agreement." He kissed her quiet, deep and thorough and joyful. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "This is everything I didn't dare hope for. You're everything I didn't dare hope for." And there, in the warm circle of his arms, with their child growing between them and Henry's world crumbling outside, Francesca finally understood the difference between settling and choosing, between adequate and extraordinary, between a boy who saw her age as a flaw and a man who saw her entirely. 5 years crystallized into happiness with surprising ease. Their daughter Catherine arrived first, dark-haired and imperious, with Richard's gray eyes and Francesca's stubborn chin. 2 years later came James, sunny and laughing and utterly adored. Francesca found her voice in unexpected ways. The Duchess of Ashford became known for her literary salons, her patronage of female education, her essays published under a carefully maintained pseudonym. Richard supported every venture, appearing at her events with books tucked under his arm and pride written across his face. "You've made me relevant again," he told her on their 3rd anniversary, watching her hold court among London's intellectual elite. "You were always relevant. I just gave you better company." Society had long since accepted them, more than accepted, celebrated. They were the couple others aspired to be, intellectually matched, genuinely affectionate, unapologetically unconventional. Henry faded into background noise. Francesca heard updates occasionally. He'd taken a minor diplomatic post in India, fleeing London's censure for colonial anonymity. He'd aged poorly, according to Catherine's gossip. Bitterness did that to a person. The encounter came at a charity function for wounded veterans, 5 years almost to the day after that catastrophic ball. Francesca, now 27 and radiant in deep green silk, stood with Richard and their children, accepting congratulations on her newest published essay. "Francesca," she turned, and there he was, Henry Ashford, weathered and diminished, his face carved with regret and sunburn in equal measure. He looked older than Richard somehow, despite the 20-year difference. "Henry," her voice was polite, distant. "I heard you'd returned from India. Briefly, before I—" He stopped, seeming to gather courage. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I was cruel and stupid, and you deserved better." "Yes," Francesca agreed simply. "I did. You seem happy." "I am happy." She glanced at Richard, who was showing James something in the garden, then back to Henry. "Genuinely, completely happy. I hope someday you find the same." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it wasn't anger either. Just the peaceful indifference of someone who'd moved so far beyond him that his presence barely registered. Henry left shortly after, and Francesca forgot about him by dinner. The final scene played out on an August afternoon at Ashford Manor, the gardens golden with summer light. Richard sat beneath an oak tree, reading to Catherine while James chased butterflies with more enthusiasm than success. Francesca, heavily pregnant with their 3rd child, watched from the terrace with her hand resting on her swelling belly. Richard caught her eye and smiled, that private smile that still made her heart skip after 5 years. She'd been called too old at 22, past her prime, used up, undesirable. Now, at 27, she was exactly where she belonged. Not in spite of her age, but because of everything those years had taught her. Patience, discernment, the courage to choose herself. Her daughter's laughter rang across the garden. Her husband rose, crossing to her with that distinctive grace, pulling her into his arms with the easy affection of long partnership. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. Indecently so. A letter arrived that evening, Henry's final correspondence, announcing his permanent relocation to Bombay. Francesca didn't open it. What was there left to say? She'd never been too old. She'd simply been waiting for a man with the wisdom to see her. And when he found her, when she chose him back, everything else became merely prelude to this. Sunlight on oak leaves, children's laughter, and the quiet triumph of a love that had never needed to be anything but real. The end. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.